What's up and welcome back to another optimization guide with Gizmo Tech. We're doing the Legion Pro 7i, which I have right here on the table. You can see this bad guy right here. So this is the i9-13900HX with RTX 4090. And if you don't know what undervolting is essentially telling the CPU to run at the same amount of wattage, but at a higher speed on the processor, thereby giving you more performance per watt going through your CPU. It used to be that when you undervolt it, it would reduce your temperatures on your CPU, but that's not really the case anymore because before it would also reduce your wattage at the same time when you're undervolting. Nowadays, the way it works is basically you're telling the CPU to go faster at the same amount of watts, which gives you more performance for the same amount of wattage, which is great. Theoretically, it should not affect the long-term viability of the laptop because you're running at the same amount of heat. And so this is the Legion laptop right here in front of me. And this guy has some of the best specs for the money that you can get. I don't think that the Legion is the pinnacle of most premium laptop features out there, but it provides excellent value for the money. And one of the nice things about this Lenovo Legion is the Vantage software, which provides a lot of customizability that a lot of other laptops don't have. In the Lenovo Vantage software, you've got CPU overclock, which this is a new feature. I've actually never tested this feature. Install the driver to activate CPU overclocking. Interesting. Well, let's try installing this if we can. Okay, so we did successfully install that driver. This is giving us access to your core voltage offset and your efficiency E-cores offset. And then you also have actual clock speeds here. I doubt that you're actually going to get any core clocks to change here. Just because you're telling it to target a higher core clock on the E-cores, for example, it's not going to actually go higher. But you've got a core voltage offset and an E-core offset, and inside of Throttlestop, we actually have additional settings that you can set beyond that. You can do CPU core, which I already have an offset in here in my Throttlestop of -160, which so far has been stable on my P cores. My P core cache, -125, also stable. SA agent -50, Intel GPU -30, iGPU unsliced -30, CPU E-core -100. is what I currently have going. The biggest thing that I'm not seeing in the Lenovo Advantage software here is that there is no cache offset. So the P-core cache offset is not in here as an option, and that can give you a nice extra bit of performance being able to undervolt the cache. So right now I'm gonna set this to nothing. So I have a preset here in Throttlestop. I'm gonna set it to nothing, so 0. Nothing is undervolted in this configuration. So we're going to go ahead and save that. We should have zeros now in our offsets here inside of HW info. Let's verify that we no longer have an overclock being applied. It's still undervolting everything, so we might have to manually adjust these things. So I'm guessing until you actually tell it to change it to a different value. Now I have Throttlestop configured so that it will always start up at the beginning when you log into Windows. Okay, so now we have zeros for our offset. So this is how you can tell if your system is actively being undervolted. You actually have to close HW info for it to pull this data. It does not pull it after HW info is open, but under the Core i9 here, you can see there's voltage offsets, and you can expand this down to make it bigger, and you can see each individual offset that you can add. And you can see that right now we have nothing. We have nothing activated for our offsets. I'm gonna leave this just like this for right now. If we were to use this to do our undervolting instead, I'm pretty sure it would work, but I'm not sure what they're using in the background to do this. Okay, so if you do encounter like where the laptop will not turn on because you undervolted too far, then you can hold the power button for 8 to 15 seconds to restart the computer and restore default parameters. We're just gonna put it in performance mode. Notice that we are in GPU mode DGPU. There are a bunch of different modes here here. Honestly, I don't know that DGPU mode is actually going to improve things at all for you, because this does have an advanced Optimus with a mux switch, and basically DGPU mode utilizes the mux switch to disable the integrated GPU entirely, and you cannot switch to good battery life mode in this mode here. So hybrid mode is probably the best option. There is iGPU only mode as well, which if you need for sure better battery life and you're not going to use the NVIDIA GPU, you can use this as well, which is nice to have that option. But in general, best gaming performance will probably be in DGPU mode or in hybrid mode with NVIDIA GPU selected. Theoretically, it should have no performance difference between those two. Basically, DGPU mode disables the iGPU, which theoretically might slightly improve the CPU performance because you don't have to run the integrated GPU. We're going to do some basic tests, and we're going to see what we get for performance. P-cores right now doing 4.1 gigahertz, 3.39 gigahertz, 4.1 gigahertz, 3.4 gigahertz basically. 164 watts of power, so a lot of power. 83 degrees on the CPU package, 77 on the cores, 29,545. That's a pretty good score. Let's let Cinebench R23 run here. With focusing on the window, this is going to give us a bit more of a ideal type of a score. We'll do like a few of these in a row, and we'll get an idea of what our best case scenario is out of the box in performance mode. This CPU will push up to 165 watts of power on its own, but theoretically the short power limit's actually 190, but I never see it pull that much. If you keep running these continuously, what you'll see is the CPU package power will drop to 140 watts eventually. Okay. What we're looking at here is, again, 4.1 gigahertz on the P cores, 3.4 gigahertz on the E cores. This is not bad. This is not amazing. You have to really continuously pummel the Legion Pro 7i in order to get it to drop to the 140 watt level. 28,900 that time. But I did notice too that even if it's dropping to 140, it will oftentimes bounce up. 29.9K best score was just over 30,000, now doing 28.8. Let's go ahead and get some thermal test done now. Let's see what we get for average temps. 89 degrees right now on the CPU package power. So that's not terrible, but it's not great. So notice that our package power is only 135 right now, 145. We're not pushing 165 watts anymore. Our core package and CPU package temps are also going to come down. That's the good thing about only doing 140 watts. This system can run fairly cool considering the amount of wattage going through the system is reduced at 140. And so now we're doing 3.8 gigahertz on the P cores, but I think these numbers can be significantly improved. 29,120. So right around 30,000 in the initial runs. Then it goes down to about 29.1K for our continuous runs. Okay, so looking at our temperatures, our temps. Initial temps are pretty good. We're pulling 66, 72 watts, so 60 to 70 watts on the CPU. 173, 174.5, so basically 175 watts to the GPU. Only 2,025, 1999, so right around the 2,000 mark for our GPU core clock. Our memory clock is at 9,001. So those are the stock, out of the box GPU clocks you can expect. We've broken the 81 degree mark, 82 degrees on that CPU, 75 degrees on the GPU. Again, the GPU boost is around 2,000, a little less, a little bit more, 2,100 now. So it does boost up into the 2,100 range, but most of the time it seems like we're doing around the 2,000 mark. 85 degrees on that CPU right there. Okay, so we managed 21,965 for our out of the box graphics score, 15,849 for our CPU score. If you do want just a basic GPU overclock, you don't want to mess with anything else, you don't want to download anything else, and same for the CPU, you can do CPU undervolting right here, but you'll need to enable this in the BIOS. So I think BIOS is our next stop, but you can see, you can undervolt up to 160 millivolts, and same for the E-cores as well. Though I think the E-cores will probably be unstable at that high of an undervolt. You also can potentially overclock CPU performance here and there a little bit, but most likely I'm not seeing, I doubt you're going to see any performance gains here, because it's saying to target 4.9 or maybe 4.8 here gigahertz for our P-core all-core clocks, and that's just not, we're not even hitting that. We're only at 4.1 when we're at 165 watts. So yeah, and we're only 3.4 and not 3.9 on the E-cores. So we're not even hitting our tops. But in order to get this CPU overclock option to even pop up, we go into the BIOS. I'm not recommending to use this CPU overclock option because you don't get all of the full functionality, like being able to undervolt your cache. But it is nice that it's integrated directly into the primary application. So it's in some senses more simple. The GPU overclock is also option inside of the Vantage software here, and you can do up to 200 megahertz on your GPU clock and 400 megahertz on your memory overclock, your VRAM. VRAM in this generation can be overclocked more than 400. Almost all the RTX 4090s will probably be able to overclock 200. This one, for example, appears to be stable at 240. At least I have not pushed it to the max limit yet either. Custom mode, so there's 4 different modes. Quiet mode, really going to hamper your performance. Balanced mode, it's going to give you decent performance. And then performance mode gives you optimal performance, basically just ramping the fans pretty heavily, but not quite max fans. Under custom mode, you can adjust the performance level. Inside of here, you can set up to 160 watts for the PL1. You can do long-term cross-loading 110. You can say the CPU max temperature, you say you want to do 99 as your throttle temperature. Long-term power limit is 140. CPU short-term power limit is 190. The important thing you need to make sure for gaming is that you need this total processor power target to be as high as possible here. Otherwise, your GPU will not do the dynamic boost. So if you're trying to use, like if you have this set to 50 watts or 45 watts and your CPU is using more than 45 watts, the GPU will not boost more than 150 total or whatever power limit you set here for your GPU. So this is your base GPU boost wattage, and this is your dynamic boost, which will only apply when the CPU is pulling less wattage than what's in this bar. So if we set this to 110, the CPU can pull up to 100 watts of power, or up to 109 watts of power, and the GPU should also still hit 175 watts. That's the way to read this, just by setting this custom mode without undervolting. This is essentially like overclocking, but without any undervolting being applied. We'll go ahead and save these settings. The other thing you need to know about custom mode is that you can set a custom fan profile curve based on temperatures. So you could say like, oh, when it gets to 60% temperatures, I want max fans, and we're gonna ramp up this much. So that way there's at least some fans going at all times. And this would very quickly get you to 100% fan speed. The other option is you can just run it in full speed. Full speed will just give you max fans all the time, which I would not recommend all the time doing. I would probably recommend doing a custom curve, but for today's testing, we will be doing full max fans. 165 watts, still not going beyond 165 watts here with custom mode enabled, though our temps are better. 4.1 gigahertz, 3.4 gigahertz. So going into custom mode is not going to give you any more CPU performance. It's just going to give you better temperatures because of increased fan speed. That's pretty much all that's going to give you. Okay, so in order for us to get into the BIOS, we're going to press the power button, and then we're going to tap F2 over and over. Look how bright that backlight is. I love it. And there we're in the BIOS. Okay, once we're in the BIOS, we'll want to go to more settings here in the bottom right. Once we get into here, we'll go to configuration, and we'll want to scroll down. Here's the restore default overclocking option if you need to revert all your overclocks. So you can disable your E cores there with active Atom cores. Those are your E cores. You can disable them if you want. Legion optimization. You want to enable this. This is going to enable CPU overclocking feature, and you want to disable undervolt protection. This is going to let you use Throttlestop. So this is going to enable the overclocking inside of the Vantage software if you want to take advantage of that. Undervolt protection will let you apply undervolts, though. You'll need that to use Throttlestop. GPU overclocking, you're going to want to enable that if you want want to be able to get the most performance. Performance mode setting is set to extreme. That's what I have set to. I don't know how much of a difference that actually makes. System peak power. You can control the system peak power to extend battery life. I guess that's for battery mode. You don't really have to worry about that for performance optimization. But yeah, those are the key things that I changed to enable all of the undervolting and capabilities that this laptop has. So we're gonna go ahead and save changes. I have Throttlestop set up to automatically launch when I turn on my laptop. So you can see it's right here, open. So under the options section here, you'll want to have an AC profile set and a battery profile set. Usually one is set for AC, battery profile set to 4. You have to enable these, check these boxes. And then you'll want to potentially adjust your undervolt if you're unstable. If you're unstable with battery mode versus plugged in mode, you'll want to have a battery undervolt that is stable. And to be able to adjust these undervolt settings, you click Fiverr here. You go to Fiverr. This opens up our primary window for changing settings. 6 different undervolts are right here. These little options at the top under Fiverr control are 4 different modes that we can set up as performance, game, internet, and battery. Generally speaking, you only really need one mode unless you run into instability when you're on battery life, and then you'll want to have a battery version as well. And under battery, my recommendation is just to make your undervolt a little bit less aggressive if you have instability issues. So I set my battery undervolt to only be -100. The cache, I did not add an undervolt to that, but I was just messing with these settings to see if they change when I unplug the laptop, and they do indeed change when you unplug the laptop if you have this set up under 2 different profiles. Under save voltage changes in the bottom right here, you have do not save voltage changes is your default. Okay, so this means that you can play around. This is what you should have selected when you're not sure that you are stable or not, and especially for booting up. If you're trying to go super aggressive with your undervolt, you do not want to have save voltage after throttle stop exits or save voltages immediately. Maybe save voltages after throttle stop exits is okay, but generally do not save voltages means that when you close throttle stop, you're not gonna, and you like restart your machine, you won't be undervolted. If you do save voltages after throttle stops exit, obviously you need to exit throttle stop and then their voltages will be saved permanently. Or save voltages immediately means that those voltages will always be active whenever your specific profile up here is select. And this can be a 2-edged sword. For example, if you hit save voltage immediately and your system immediately crashes, when you reboot and your throttle stop is auto starting, you may run into instability before you can get back into throttle stop and disable it. So that's the main downside there. You have to enter safe mode in Windows to prevent the startup from happening for throttle stop to turn it off. Or you could go into the BIOS and disable undervolting as well to be able to change your throttle stop settings. That'd be another option. My recommendation for the saves is do not save changes until you find an undervolt that you've found to be effective and stable that you want to use. As soon as you find that undervolt, then you can hit save changes immediately, and then your undervolt will be active as soon as throttle stop opens up again. Otherwise, you'll have to reset your undervolt every time you open throttle stop. Let's talk about setting up throttle stop for your initial launch. Okay, so you're gonna wanna go to the start menu here. You'll want to do task scheduler, and you're going to need to create a new task. So you're gonna create task. You can name this TS launch, throttle stop launch, that's fine. Triggers, you're gonna add a new trigger to this. It's going to be at login of any user, or if it's only for you using the laptop, you can do that too. But any user log in, and then the actions will be start a program, and you're just gonna go to the throttle stop folder, wherever that is, and you'll want to not move that throttle stop folder, otherwise the scheduler will break, obviously. And you just click throttle stop as the program, click OK. And now whenever start the machine, throttle stop will automatically open. I'm not gonna go ahead and save that because I've already created that task inside of the task scheduler. Throttle stop automatically opens because of the task scheduler that I've already set up. This is the IETS GT500 laptop cooler. We're gonna use this to help reduce our temps. I do not think that the Legion Pro 7i really needs it. This is a laptop that has good temps out the box, but we're gonna see today how much this cooler can aid the Legion Pro 7i. This cooler was the best cooler that I tested out of a batch of coolers that I bought. It has an air filter, which helps prevent any additional dust from getting in your laptop. It's got a like suction style or a air blowing, like it sucks air in from the back and kind of pushes it up into the bottom intakes of your laptop. And because the air is filtered, like I said, it should help reduce the amount of dust that goes in your machine and your fans. So you get additional RGB around your laptop with the cooler. It's a very loud cooler. That's the main downside to it, in my opinion. And we're gonna go into the Lenovo Vantage software. We're gonna set it to custom mode, okay? Under custom mode, we're just gonna set everything to max. Crossload, set this to 109, so that way your GPU never down clocks to 150. And we have full fan speeds going right now. Both the Legion fan and the GT500 cooler is going at max. Our offsets are here. You can see the offset minus 160 millivolts, minus 125 for the ring. Then our L2 is minus 100. Those are the three. This is the cache. The ring is the cache. And those are the three most important ones. So we were doing 4.1 gigahertz before. We're now doing 4.6 on our P cores. That is huge. 500 megahertz increase, 3.7 gigahertz on our E cores up from 3.4. So 300 megahertz on our E cores, 500 megahertz on our P cores, and look at our score, 32,500. 33,022. All right, so we've increased our performance on our CPU by 10%. That to me is phenomenal undervolting value right there. Right now we're only doing 69 on the cores, 74 for the package. And the highest temp we've recorded so far is only 76 degrees on the CPU. Let's go into a 10-minute test. It's pulling these 4.6 gigahertz, 4.5 gigahertz, 3.6, 3.7 gigahertz on only 152 watts of power. So we're pulling less wattage and having higher clock speeds at the same time. Of course, pulling less wattage, that's also going to help translate to lower temperatures as well. So only 77 degrees on the package, 71 on the cores right now, with the peak temp for the package being 77 degrees, while pulling all of this juice through the CPU. That is really great temps. So we've effectively dropped the CPU temp by 12 degrees by adding max fans and the laptop cooler, while at the same time increasing our performance in Cinebench R23 by 10%. 32,700. So that's 3,700 point increase in our long power limit performance, a phenomenal performance gain. 32,900. So if we were to average those three together, we'd be getting right around 32,000, say 650. There's a crash right there. So that means that we have our undervolt overtuned a bit. If this happens, I'd recommend dropping your undervolt back, say 10% or so. Okay, so if we're to adjust our undervolt settings, opening throttle stop here, we're gonna go ahead and drop this down to say 150 for RP. This is our most aggressive undervolt, so this is the one I'm gonna adjust. It might be some other undervolt that's causing this, but we're just gonna do 150 for our P cores, and we're going to go ahead and save those settings. So we've reduced our undervolt by 10 millivolts. If we crash again, we'll know to continue reducing our undervolt by in intervals of 10. Basically is what I do. If you want to ensure stability more quickly, you can do intervals of 20. Once you found stability, you can increase it back until you find the right level. Let's go ahead and do our calculations for how much improvement in long-term power limits we had. We had 29,100 before. Our long-term power limit performance versus long-term power limit performance, we had a gain of 3,600, and we're going to divide that by 29,100. We had a 12.4% performance gain overall from undervolting the i9 processor. Like I said, this isn't necessarily the maximum undervolt. We did run into instability, but there might be other aspects, like maybe we could increase the E-core undervolt further, or maybe the cache undervolt further, because we may not be maxed on all three of the relevant undervolt. We're going to go ahead and do undervolting the RTX 4090 for best thermals and best overall performance. All right, so MSI Afterburner, this is the default skin. You can change the skins to different things. The way we're going to be undervolting is going to be different than when we do max performance overclocking. If you want to undervolt for the most performance, the first step is get 3D mark benchmark time spy running, and you'll want to run it in a loop, or you can run heaven benchmark or whatever you want. But we're going to do it in a windowed mode. We're going to loop it, and we're going to do graphics test 2. We're going to run this in the background. What this is going to do is it's going to set our GPU to basically highest possible performance mode. It's going to give us realistic feedback for whether our overclock is stable or not, at least initially. Now, not every game engine is going to perform exactly the same as 3D Mark, so you may run into instability and issues. Basic overclocking is just change this core clock up and down to overclock and undervolt. If you were to undervolt it, you could just like minus this down. This is not what you want to do. But I'm just saying, like, this is one way you could undervolt your system. If you apply this, it's going to reduce your core clocks here, which is just not going to be very good for your performance level, okay? Instead, what I recommend doing, if you're trying to undervolt your system, go to the curve editor. This curve editor, see this line going across? This shows us what active node is being utilized. And when the GPU is in high performance mode, you'll be able to see what node range is used for the performance. So each node here represents a clock speed on the left that the GPU is hitting and a voltage in millivolts right here. So 850 millivolts or 0.85 volts is very common. Now I have HW info configured to show me my GPU voltage. You go down in HW info, you click on your core voltage, you right click and you click RTSS, and then you click show value in OSD and show label if you want to have the label. So you can see that right now, the GPU is pulling 865 millivolts, 840. This is all stock. No overclock currently being applied. Right here, you can also see our active voltage at the same time, 885, 850. So we're seeing a range of 840 to 875 is very common. In Afterburner, if we click the curve, we can see that range being hit right here. You can see that's 845 right there. That's the 845 node. If I press tab, I can move down the list of nodes here. When you're trying to overclock your system, when you use the curve editor, you can adjust each node individually, versus when you do this core clock slider, you're just raising all of the curve. The whole curve is going up. So we probably just crashed because of the undervolt, because I did not apply that overclock. That overclock was not active going up and down. So I'm gonna go ahead and lower my undervolt on all my stuff. All right, so our undervolt just got a little bit less aggressive. Essentially, when you're trying to optimize for best possible thermals, what you want to do is target a low end on your curve, a little bit below the wattage that your GPU normally pulls. We saw, and during max performance mode, we saw that we were hitting in the 840 range a lot. And that gives us right around a 2000 boost clock. So what we would want to do is prevent the GPU from going to the full wattage, and we will instead want to go a few nodes down, say 5 or 6 nodes. Let's go to the 800 node here. And what we'd want to do is just raise our boost clock up to that default around 2000, or maybe like right now, I would probably add plus 200 basically to the curve there. And then we'll apply that. That flattens our curve right around that area. And now we also want to click that node and we want to press Control L. That'll lock our voltage to that lower voltage range and help prevent the GPU from pulling any additional power, which what that does is basically gives us better thermals, and we're going to get the same performance you would get out of the box for the GPU. All right, and what we want in this type of scenario is for our temps to also be really excellent. And what we want is to get a high boost clock on the GPU while reducing our wattage. Okay, so we were basically doing 173 to 175 watts previously, and we were only doing about 2000 on the GPU boost. Now you can see that we're occasionally bumping our wattage up. And if you look, it's because the curve, it's still, some of these need to be dropped a little bit because we're occasionally hitting them. And really what we want is the GPU to only hit 800 millivolts here. That's when we're hitting the lower wattage level with the same level of performance. Honestly, this is better performance than out of the box performance, because before we were doing around 1990, 2000 or so megahertz on the boost clock. Now we're doing 2070, which is more, while at the same time having less juice going through the GPU. So this is an undervolt that optimizes our thermals. If we want to go to just, if our goal is stock levels of performance, you know, we could try to go even further down the undervolt train, say 775 node. And let's take this up to the 2000 mark, a plus 215 overclock. We may want to go ahead and lower our curve down like this. So that way our GPU doesn't boost up the way we wanted it, or the way it was there. We want to keep the GPU to this 775 node. So we're going to set it to 2000, just like that. To be able to do this, you click and hold control and drag down with your mouse. See, now notice that all of this whole row here got lined up for us. So now it's not going to boost our wattage beyond. And, let's also go ahead and do control L to lock our voltage to that lower node. And now let's see. So 775, and we're hitting 1995 for our GPU boost clock. And look at our RTX 4090 wattage, 146 now. So, and our temps are only 61 degrees, 69 on the CPU. Absolutely phenomenal temps. Remember that we were getting up to 85 degrees on the CPU before, and our GPU was doing 75, I believe. So we've dropped 15 degrees on the GPU because of the laptop cooler and the GPU undervolt. We've done about minus 15 degrees on the CPU. Right now, what I have here is basically stock performance for the GPU, but lower wattage, and overclocked and undervolted CPU for optimal GPU performance. Now, let's go ahead and talk maximum possible performance on this system. I'm gonna go ahead and reset our curve here. So we have a default curve again. So the tricky part, when I was trying to get the GPU to lock to a specific voltage, I couldn't get it to do that. The VBIOS keeps wanting to jump around the voltage range. So like it's jumping around between 835, 800, something like that, 840, all the way up to like 870, 880. And because it keeps jumping around, even locking the voltage on the node here didn't do it the way I wanted to. Like when I was doing the RTX 4060, 4070, I was able to select the highest node, and the GPU, the VBIOS is always hitting that node all the time, and it wasn't a problem. We could try to just lock our voltage to that specific voltage node, and it would just peg it at the highest overclock possible. You can't do that on the Legion, or I was not able to get that going on the Legion here. So that's the tricky part about doing this overclock right now. And that's why currently the best performance that I've been able to get out of the system is just raising our curve overall. So that way, as it jumps between the different voltage levels, we're getting the best possible boost. That would involve just hitting this to, let's try 250. I don't know if 250 will be stable or not. Let's just do 400 on our VRAM. All right, so we've applied that now. So right now it's at 825 core voltage. Look at that, 2400 on the boost clock for a little bit there, 840, 845, 2235, 2220, 2235, 2220. Obviously, I believe that you probably could wipe the VBIOS out and install a different VBIOS, maybe be able to get it to lock to a specific node and stay there, rather than shifting around between these different nodes. But right now, we're getting into that much higher boost clock range. We were, again, around the 2000 boost clock. Now look at us, jumping between 2200 to 2300, occasionally dipping below that 2200, right in the 2175 range. But on average, I'd say we're averaging around 2230 to 2250. Depending on what voltage node the GPU jumps to. And look at our CPU is also cranking at 78 watts of power, GPU doing 173 watts of power, and our temps are still great. So that is just phenomenal. Custom mode with max fans and a laptop cooler, really, to keep the CPU and GPU in this performance range while pulling this kind of wattage is very impressive. Let's say we were gonna try to lock it to 840 because it keeps boosting that low. And let's just say we wanted to keep it a stable 2250. Let's see if we're stable trying to do this. We're gonna try locking the voltage, press Control L to lock the voltage. Let's see what happens. So look at it, it keeps dropping. Now it's 825 voltage, 820, and look at our clock speed right here is only 21 890. Now that it's hitting the 840, we're getting the 2250 range, but it's not holding steady to that voltage. I don't know. I guess you could try doing the lowest possible node. Like it was trying to do it under 825. Let's try using 825 as our locking voltage node. And let's only do 2200. Let's see if we can get a stable overclock here. So it's staying at 2190 right now at the 825 voltage, and it's not quite staying perfectly stable. It is dropping to the 2175 range, so it keeps jumping down, but it's staying pretty stable around this point. But the thing is, we're not getting maximum performance because we're not pulling the full 175 watts on the GPU either. But we are overclocked, and we are getting slightly lower wattage. So this is a pretty good overclock undervolt for kind of optimal performance range. I don't know if it would be stable or not. So anyway, the best performance that I have been able to see in this system is just to set your overclock. We're gonna do 250, a 500 memory overclock. This is the highest stable clocks that I've seen on the GPU so far. Averaging over 2200, sometimes boosting even higher. Our overclock here is quite nice. 2300 on our boost clock, very high for an RTX 4090. Over 2200 is high. You know, like I said, the stock out of the box 4090 does 2000. So we've got over a 10% overclock going right now on this GPU. Let's go ahead and run TimeSpy and see if it's stable at this plus 250, 500 OC. Okay, so looking at our temps and our performance levels and our GPU boost clock, look at how much higher our GPU is boosting. You know, so the window on the right over here is the Vantage CPU. So that's with the Vantage GPU overclock default being applied, 150 plus to the OC. It seemed like we were pulling just a little bit less wattage there. Wow. So we managed to get 1,208 additional points over stock overclock, or like the Vantage GPU overclock with our additional OC here. That's quite delicious. I don't think our CPU score really went up. Yeah, it actually went down 40 points, which is very interesting. So 23,208 minus, so our initial score was 21,965. So we gained 1,243 for our overclock. And if we divide that by our original score, 5.6% performance gain. That's our initial straight TimeSpy performance gains. Our CPU performance gain was 12.6% from undervolting. Our GPU performance gain with TimeSpy 5.6%. Look at 940 millivolts. Our GPU is not at 100% utilization, and we crashed again. So this is definitely, I think, the reason why, like, it's boosting so high with our core voltage, and our clock speed 2595 is insane. The node that we want to really target, the highest realistic one is probably 850. Raise this sucker up, all right? We're gonna take this sucker up to 22 plus 220. Let's try plus 220. I think this is gonna provide nice stability. We're also gonna lower our memory overclock. Let's do 400. All right, so now we're at 850. Our boost clock is 2280. Our wattage also dropped from 150 to 125, which is nice. Cooler temps. Look at our temps, 53 degrees. Jiminy Christmas. That is such good temps. We're being frame capped right now. We're hitting max frames. Right now, what we've got going on is an undervolt, because we were doing 940. Stock voltage is 940. We've got an undervolt and an overclock being applied. This is giving us max GPU performance, reducing our wattage pull, giving us lower temperatures at the same time. All right, looking at our 1% lows and overall FPS, it's very similar in the close to 300s, basically max FPS. It boosts around between 2150 to 2350 for our boost clocks. Our CPU is about the same wattage, but look at our CPU clock speed, 4.9 to 5 gigahertz on the new one over here, with the undervolt being applied to the CPU. Clock speed here, 4. 4.4. So our CPU undervolt is really amping our CPU clock speed in game. With max fans and the laptop cooler enabled, our CPU temp has dropped about 13 degrees. Our GPU temp has dropped 12 degrees. So that's phenomenal. I guess we should probably do no undervolt first and then do an undervolt. All right, so right now we should have no undervolt being applied. Okay, so this is going to be our stock run. 130 FPS, 132. Our GPU boost clock, we're not GPU bound, we're CPU bound right now. We're doing 102 watts to that CPU, 4.8 gigahertz. 5.1, 4.8, 132, 83 for our actual performance number. So we're going to apply GPU overclock profile 2, which is our curve overclock, which has the flat curve. And then in Throttlestop, we're going to switch to our performance undervolts. We are undervolted and overclocked now. 140 and higher 1% lows at 86 right now. So that gave us a approximately 9 FPS gain. And our 1% lows was just like a few FPS. But that's a nice quick overclock gain, right? Right here, we're doing 141. Disable our GPU overclock. Does our GPU overclock? Wow, our GPU overclock didn't really affect things very much. We're actually getting slightly higher FPS now because we're letting the GPU voltage run and we're getting higher clock speed slightly. 2340 on our GPU core clock. So yeah, our GPU is basically making no difference. Our GPU makes no difference here. Our CPU is the one that matters. Look at our wattage pull, only 86 watts right now on our GPU. Our CPU, we were doing 100 and something watts before we undervolted. So right now we're doing 85. Let's open Throttlestop up again. Let's remove our undervolt. We jumped from 85 approximate watts now to over 103 watts on that CPU. By undervolting inside of a game, we're seeing massive wattage reduction, which is going to reduce our temperatures from undervolting, while at the same time giving us about the same levels of performance in this scenario. So this is different than Cinebench R23. Undervolting inside of a game, giving us reduced wattage pull, while potentially also increasing our FPS. So let's say around 70 to 72 for our temps. Let's apply the undervolt. We're only doing 84 watts, similar clock speed on the CPU, but look at our temps. Our temps are coming down quickly. A 5-degree drop in about 15 seconds. Very impressive. Very similar levels of FPS. This kind of performance gain might be really hard to notice. You know, and in this scenario, we may not see much performance gain because we're using that curve and because we're not letting the GPU go to that max potential voltage of 940 millivolts. So the original test got 524. Our overclock undervolt result, 544. So we got 20 FPS gain for free. Woohoo! Interesting. Looking at our GPU boost clock, I'm not sure that we're gonna see much performance gain here. Look at our boost clock. We're only hitting 2145 right now. We're not locking to the 850. So this tells me that we may get better performance using a more standard overclock here. So right now we're hitting the high wattage. Our millivolts is only 835. We're not hitting the consistent 850 where we want to be because it must be pulling too much power. It must be too GPU bound right now in this scenario. I'm guessing we can get a higher average boost clock by switching from this curve here over to a plus 240. So what we can do as well, we could go to our curve here and we can select our nodes. What we can do is we can move all of our nodes up a little bit higher. Let's say to 2200 or 2270. Our voltage is still not able to maintain. And we're still dropping all the way down the curve, further down than we really want, which means that our curve is just too aggressive. And if we actually look at our curve editor, when the game is running, our node is falling down the curve here because it's too aggressive. The GPU cannot maintain it with the current VBIOS. So the currently active node appears to be around this range, all right? And our average boost clock is only 2160. I'm not sure that we're gonna be able to get our full performance out of this type of curve overclock. So going to this standard offset overclock, I think this is gonna be our best bet. So now look at us. 2235, that appears to be an improvement almost for sure. Do a run through. Let's go ahead and split screen our results. Wow, that is some performance gain. Wow. Oh my God. All right. 129 FPS versus 115. And look at our 1% low gain from 43 up to 105. Doubled our 1% lows? More than doubled. I don't know. That seems a bit weird, honestly. But our boost clock, like look at this same moment. We were doing 2200 right now on our boost clock versus only 2010. I don't know if that's just a temporary dip in the boost clock or what, but that's a big difference, and a 14 FPS gain on 115 FPS. So that's like a 11-12% performance gain in this game with much higher 1% lows. Those higher 1% lows, I mean, I would probably attribute the 1% low gain to the undervolt. Look at the CPU clock speed right now. We're jumping between 4.8 and 5 gigahertz, 5.2 gigahertz on the CPU. And that means our clock speed on the CPU is just much, much higher. And that is giving us a huge gain to our 1% lows, which is going to really improve the perceived smoothness of the game. So let's I want to look at this 3.7, 3.9 gigahertz, 3.8 gigahertz. Yeah, our CPU is being kneecapped basically before. We had about 1,000 megahertz gain in our CPU clock speed at the same wattage, which is just really goes to show the advantage of undervolting. That's insane. And the 1% low gains are just absolutely insane as well. So that is probably our biggest gain so far today in gaming performance. Temperatures are also 6 degrees cooler on the CPU with the undervolt and the laptop cooler and max fans, and 8 degrees cooler on the GPU. So another huge, not only are we getting way more performance, we're also getting much lower temperatures in God of War. The text over here on the right is actually incorrect because we're just doing a plus 240 offset right now for our GPU boost. So keep that in mind. Appears to be too much at plus 240. In the games that are CPU bound, it ends up being too much. So I think we gotta drop our offset to plus 220 and see if we can get better stability for our general offset gaming. Okay, so we're gonna go down to 220 and we're still locked at 885. So looking at our boost clock, our GPU boost clock is going above that of the old one on the right, but our actual FPS number appears to be lower. Look at our CPU. Our CPU clock speed is higher. Our GPU clock speed is much higher. 1% lows are about the same. Our FPS, according to MSI Afterburner, is lower though. So that might just be Cyberpunk having gone through the update and updated drivers and all that. I don't know. All right, so we got 125 before in the past, and we got 120 today. So I think what we're gonna have to do is run this again by disabling our overclocks to see what our performance is. Let's go back to the settings and rerun it again, but let's turn off our overclock. Yeah, so we are definitely hitting lower FPS than we were with the overclock, down to, I think we were doing like 115-ish right now, and now we're doing 109 without an overclock and undervolt. Definitely a nice improvement for CPU and GPU performance. Looking at our CPU wattage, doing over 90 watts right now. That's obviously giving us great CPU performance, but I'm pretty sure we were pulling a lot less wattage when we have the undervolt enabled. I'm going to show you that like undervolting your CPU in gaming workloads, it really does reduce your wattage pull and temperatures. Okay, so 112 with no overclock, no undervolt. We got an 8 FPS gain approximately by applying in the undervolt and overclock, which is quite nice. All right, so let's just do this test twice. We'll do no overclock here initially. No overclock, no undervolt. This is going to be our stock test. We got a nice GPU boost clock, but that's because we're CPU bound right now. Only 77% GPU utilization. Our 1% lows are pretty good at 44. 105 FPS average right now. 104, 46. We're going to apply our undervolt to the CPU right there. We'll do our plus 220 500 OC, okay? I'm gonna lock it right there. Okay, so I locked it to 890. There's a part of me that wants to just try the straight 220 with no frame cap or no voltage Undervolt. Let's just see if it's stable or not and what FPS we get, all right? We might crash. 120 so far. Keep in mind, we were doing 104, right? Was our average before? So we went from 104 FPS to 111. We also increased our 1% lows by a few FPS as well. So that's a 7 FPS gain. So about a 6% performance gain there. Let's try doing the, let's see if doing our curve reduces our performance at all. Let's see what we get now. Our GPU undervolt and overclock. So we're not letting the GPU run as high and as hot as possible, but this CPU bound game performance appears to be reduced compared to stock, or very similar to stock GPU performance. Okay, so that gives you an idea. If you do this whole on the curve editor, your CPU bound game performance will actually be impacted, right? We just lost 7 FPS because we flattened the curve here at the end. That's super interesting. So that's why I'm thinking doing something like plus 220. If this is stable at plus 220, maybe plus 210, this is gonna give us a more consistent OC overall. And if you really need to prevent it from running too high, maybe just say limiting it to 2500 might be the right thing. So this is locking it to 920 millivolts. So that way the GPU does not boost above 2500 total clock speed. 128 versus 136. Notice our GPU is pulling more wattage. Our CPU is clocking nearly 1,000 megahertz faster, including 20 watts higher now that we're in custom mode. I mean, we're seeing some really nice performance gains here. And notice our temps are also lower. Laptop cooler, maximum fans. You know, the thing is, like, even though we're pulling more wattage on that CPU, we're still hitting excellent overall performance. Wow, the 1% lows are so crappy in Dead Space. It still looks smooth, and it's just, and the frame time graph looks crazy, but like it's not stuttering on my screen, and you can see on the live stream it looks smooth. But yeah, the 1% lows are only 27 FPS right now, which are really low. So right now 133 FPS versus 123. Better average by about 11 FPS gain there. Our 1% lows are almost exactly the same. 30 FPS for our 1% lows, 29 for our 1% lows with the overclock. So 1% lows were not really affected much, just slightly worse. One FPS is not much of a difference, but an 11 FPS gain overall. So that's excellent. And then of course our temps dropped on both the CPU and the GPU because of the laptop cooler, despite the fact that we're running 20 watts hotter on the Legion Pro 7i. So very interesting. We are right now being at least partially CPU bound because our GPU utilization only 83, 89, 93%. So we are being CPU bound to at least to a certain degree, which shows you that by undervolting the CPU and overclocking the GPU, you get the best combo of performance in this type of game. With just one or just the other, you probably wouldn't see the same level of performance. You're probably getting some performance gain from both of those things being done to the CPU. Okay, so out the gate, we're seeing some performance gains. 146 FPS versus 152. 151 versus 144. Looking at our temperatures, we've dropped about 8 to 9 degrees on the CPU and about 10 degrees on the GPU. Notice our wattage pull being a little higher on that GPU. Our core clocks on the GPU not being too much different, just being slightly higher. The big difference being that CPU, geez. CPU is not only pulling more wattage, but it's also pulling much higher core clocks. 149 for our FPS in the past versus 161. We ended up with 12, almost 13 FPS gain. And that is, of course, at 150 is going to translate to only about an 8% performance gain from overclocking and undervolting. And I got to say, I think the CPU is probably one of the big areas of gains. Notice our 1% low, 142 for our mins, 127 for our min in the past. So we had a 15 FPS gain for our 1% lows. Undervolting in particular is probably the thing that helped us with that. Pushing a higher CPU core clock is going to help with our min FPS. Here we are. 131, 132 versus 116 right now. Our CPU boost from the Undervolt, Overclock, and custom fan mode, 1,000 to 1,200 megahertz faster, 10 degrees cooler, 10 degrees cooler on the CPU, 12 degrees cooler on the GPU. Our boost clock on the GPU is 100 megahertz more than the Vantage Overclock, 14 average FPS increase, and 63 FPS increase for our 1% lows. Wow. And let's go over the final settings that I think I would recommend the most for overclocking the Lenovo Legion Pro 7i. Inside of here, my Undervolt settings has my CPU core at -140, cache at -115, and my CPU E core is at -90. When you do your custom mode, inside of here, we have our power sliders slid over to the right. This is just letting our CPU pull more juice, which the fact that it's pulling more juice, we saw like 1,000 to 1,200 increase to our CPU core clocks in games, which is definitely, I think, related to our 1% low improvements. So it's a combination of undervolting the CPU, also letting the CPU just run in this custom mode, and then also overclocking in MSI Afterburner, or you could do it in the Vantage OC. And if it's easier and more stable, you could just do a 200/400 OC in the Vantage OC checkbox button, and you don't have to worry about all this other stuff, and you probably are not going to crash. But if you want to be able to push past that limit, you're going to have to use something like Afterburner. And if you want to be able to prevent crashes beyond that, this is what we ended up finding to be the most stable, plus 220/500. And then we locked our voltage node to 920 at 2,500. This prevents our GPU clock from running rampant and going too high, causing a crash from going up to the 2,600 clock speed range in those CPU bound games. Because when the GPU is not really that engaged, it'll just ramp the clock as high as it can go, and then it goes too fast and it trips and stumbles and crashes. So this allows us to do a slightly higher OC without crashing. But otherwise, you could probably go 200 without having to lock it here, and you probably have the very similar result, but just slightly less performance. Yeah, and in certain games, it was okay to let this run, but in other games, it wasn't. So that's why if you want most stability, I would use Control-L to lock it around the 920 millivolt range, but maybe your silicon is better than mine and it won't crash anyway without locking it. Maybe you could go to 240, 250 without crashing, or maybe 200 crashes you, or maybe 180 crashes you. GPU overclocking is a per CPU chip solution, and it's going to be individual to each laptop. So your results will vary compared to the results that we got today. I think a lot of laptops will be able to overclock and undervolt a little bit better than this one that we did today, and some of them will be worse. So just keep that in mind, that your mileage will vary. See you guys in the next one.